Hello, and thank you everyone for joining. Today we have Erin Lee, who is a founder of Mindful Moments. So she will share with us a bit more about mindfulness during this session. So Erin has certifications in North America and in the UK for mindfulness coaching and stress management, which we will ask her shortly. She's a qualified certified instructor in MBSR, which is Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. So, Erin, thank you for joining us on this lovely Sunday morning in Singapore.
Yes, thank you, Joshua, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here, and it is indeed a very good sunny day.
So, I usually do this kind of a little episode seasons, every 5 sessions. So today
Mm.
actually is a 10th session. So it's a kind of a
Wow.
completion of the second cycle of 5, and it's also the end of 2020 as well. So it's been kind of a rough ride for a lot of people this year, isn't it?
Yes, it has, definitely.
So Erin, would you like to share with us a bit more about MBSR? But before that, maybe a brief bio about yourself. Basically, how you got into MBSR. What appealed to you about the practice, and also about sharing with us about your educational experiences with the institutions in California and in the UK as well.
Sure, sure. So maybe I'll start with how I got into mindfulness in the first place. So I was leading quite a stressed out life when I was in the corporate world. I was actually doing corporate communications work for about a decade or so. And I was really treating myself very poorly during over that 10 years. Basically, very burnt out. With every job that I went into, I just made myself so exhausted and so miserable. I attached myself to the identity that I was this invincible workaholic. A lot of self worth was attached to that. So, of course, none of those jobs turned out well for me, and my mental health suffered a lot, and of course, consequently, my physical health. So I was quite sickly. I think over those periods of time, I would develop like these hacking coughs that lasted for months. So I can't say that those were definitely psychosomatic, but they were, of course, due to a lot of stress and physical exhaustion. And I remember my last job was in China, and I was working for a PR agency, and that was sort of the last straw on the camel's back. I was really, really on the brink of breaking down, and that was when I realized it suddenly clicked in me at one of the PR events that I was doing that I really had to start paying more attention to myself. And I realized that I never really paid attention to myself before. Yeah, so that's how I decided to take a step back. But, I was still quite rational then in a sense that I didn't just quit my job, right? And then just started exploring. So what I did was I converted from a full-time job to a part-time, and I spent the rest of the time to just explore what I could be doing. So I was looking at different things. I got into hypnotherapy for a few years. And at the same time, I was also meditating. I was doing meditation, in particular Vipassana meditation. And over this period of time, I also got to know, of course, mindfulness and the whole discipline of learning it, teaching it, practicing it in a secular setting. That's quite different from a non-secular setting. And meditation in general, mindfulness has really changed my life, transformed my life in, I wouldn't say it's magical, but I would say it really changed my life in very subtle but very real ways. And I really wanted to be able to, introduce this to more people. And so I decided to make mindfulness my profession, and decided to get myself trained in that. Right. So I wanted to really teach people what I myself practice. So that started a whole professional journey of becoming a mindfulness teacher. And of course, back then, I mean, it wasn't a long time ago, but back then, the go-to teacher training was usually the MBSR certification, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And that was a program developed by Professor John Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts. So, I mean, the program was really successful, and it's being developed. It's evolved over the years. It's being taught worldwide. So, and it's also very research-based, research-proven as well. So I actually got into the whole training pathway that took me about 2 years at least to complete.
Sounds like a really eventful journey, especially transitioning from a very high functioning, stressful work environment, especially living in cities within Asia, as you mentioned, in China and then in Singapore as well.
Yes.
Which is all a lot. Which is just centralized really on high levels of stress and high level of so-called productivity, material productivity within a job sense.
Yes.
So what can you share with us on MBSR for those people who are hearing this for the first time, for those viewers who are coming in? Right now, we have Erin Lee, who's the founder of Mindful Moments, and she specializes in mindfulness and stress management trainings. So she will be sharing with us a bit about MBSR and mindfulness-based stress reduction. So could you share with us a bit more about MBSR and some of these techniques and how beneficial it can be for us?
Sure. So MBSR stands for Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and I would say it's a very popular program for those of us who want to really get into the practice of mindfulness and to really integrate mindfulness as a way of life for ourselves. To start off, it's not it's meant to be an introductory program, but it's not an easy program to complete. Although there have been many people who have completed the program. So the whole program lasts about 8 weeks. So it's an 8-week program, 9 sessions in total. So I'm just explaining a little bit about the structure. So it's 8 weekly sessions of about 2 to 2.5 hours with a teacher and learning in a group setting. And in between, there's also a full day retreat of about 6 hours. So with this program, people sign up and they actually get together in a group to learn and practice mindfulness. So there's a lot of practice. So it's primarily experiential. Because with mindfulness, it's not about gaining that intellectual knowledge about what mindfulness is. It's really about having the direct experience of practicing it and how it could benefit you in various ways. And on top of practicing, we would also get together and we would share our practice experiences. For example, after the teacher guides the learners in doing an awareness of breath practice, right? And then the learners would get together to share, what came up for them? What did they experience? What did they encounter in that, say, 15, 20 minutes of practice? And that's where a lot of the learning comes from. It comes from understanding the common grounds of humanity, the common grounds of the human experience, the challenges that came up. And we realized through these sharings that we're not alone in our struggles. We're not alone in our difficulties. So it helped to change perspectives a lot about ourselves and our relationship with this world. And on top of the sharing, there is, of course, a lot of practice involved. So when we talk about learning mindfulness practices, many people might have the idea that meditation in general is just sitting somewhere, being still, cross-legged, looking all zen and everything. In the context of MBSR, the practices don't have to be this way, although we do teach you to sit and be still as well. But then we encourage the practice of mindfulness in different postures. So essentially sitting down. So we could sit on the floor or we could sit on a chair. We could be lying down on a surface, like a flat on our back. We could be standing up. We could be walking and in movement and stillness. So we learn to practice these mindfulness in these various postures because we want to be able to integrate these skills of mindfulness into day-to-day life where we will be in these various postures. And I just wanted to elaborate a little bit about the postures, because when the MBSR program was first launched, was first developed, it was actually set in a hospital setting. So the people who were taught the program were patients with a lot of, they were suffering from illnesses, chronic pain, and many of them were actually bound to wheelchairs or bedridden, and they couldn't sit, like how you typically would see meditators do. So they would be practicing mindfulness and meditating lying flat on their backs on the bed, right, or in a wheelchair. So it sort of evolved from there, and people started to open their perspectives towards mindfulness practice. Oh, it can be practiced that way, and it actually should be a way of life. So in terms of what you're learning, besides the practices itself, we're actually touching a lot about stress. And stress is sort of like a modernized, urbanized word for suffering in general. And we're talking about, day-to-day stresses of the urban life, in a city life. So it could be work stress, it could be family stress, societal stress, universal stress. And no matter what places of stress we come from, essentially we are learning in the MBSR program to change our relationship with stress. And in order to do that, the mindfulness approach is to learn to turn our attention inwards and be able to observe ourselves, observe in times of stress, what do we become? What happens within us, in terms of the states of mind, in terms of the body, in terms of internal reactions. And once that awareness is established, then that's when the change comes in, because we are also learning to work with the skills of mindfulness, such as skills of focus and anchoring, and skills of self-observation. And that's when we start to change our relationship with stress. And over time, a lot of people do realize that, hey, after going through an 8-week program, that's when, when I'm faced with the same stress, I'm actually a lot less reactive, or I don't notice as much anxiety as before. I don't tend to ruminate obsessively about that same incident over and over again. So people do see changes on these fronts, and they do recognize the benefits of the MBSR program. The only big challenge is to commit to it, I would say, and to commit fully to that full stretch of that 8 weeks.
Yes, and with all trainings, commitment, dedication, part of the prerequisites,
Yes.
So it's very, I think it's fascinating what you're trying to do with mindful moments, bringing mindful awareness, bringing stress reduction, stress management to a country so unique like Singapore, for example, and you do it for the rest of the world as well. But in our context today, like in Singapore, a city-state, which is, we do not have the vastness of lifestyles like a township or village and whatnot. We were born in an island city-state, which is a very unique situation, which I think very few places in the world share this. I think I can only recall Singapore, Monaco being a few places which has this unique situation. So you've mentioned about your training, and the origins of mindfulness also heads back many centuries or even millennia. And we see some of these practices, especially you mentioned John Kabat-Zinn, coming from Buddhist traditions, influenced and inspired also by Buddhist traditions, and repackaged in a modern setting skillfully. So we see in the Pali tradition, it's mentioned as sati.
Yes.
And this word can translate to several things. It can be conscious awareness. It could also point towards attention, attentiveness.
Yes.
So it's kind of a concentration, which is not ruminating, as you mentioned earlier, onto past or onto the future. So we do not have the anxiety of the past, and we do not have the fear of the future. So it's more towards being within an unfindable present, attentiveness. And this is a very interesting aspect, which if for viewers who are interested to know more, you can read up on John Kabat-Zinn and MBSR, or you can also log on to Erin's website, which I will include in the links on the YouTube comments. So yes, the Satipatthana Sutras also mention about the 4 applications of mindfulness as well. And I think as this conversation goes on, we will speak slowly about how we can slowly tune in to the different layers of mindfulness. Would you like to share with us about, for the times and age now and from where we are at, for a lot of us, would you like to speak a bit more about mindfulness of body, for example?
Okay. So when we talk about body nowadays, even though we literally carry the body wherever we go, but we don't really pay much attention to it. So there's a saying that, nowadays we're basically living from the neck up, right? So we're in this headspace all the time. And I think there's a price to pay for being so intelligent and being so complex, right? As the human race. We can conjure up so many wonderful things, but also many terrible things at the same time. And essentially, when we do that, we're basically staying here. And this is a lot of times this is what's driving us crazy, or this is what's exacerbating certain of our stresses or sufferings. So with mindfulness, one of the very first foundations of mindfulness is to be aware of the body. And this is also something that's covered a lot throughout the MBSR program. No matter what practices we come to, we want to be able to come back to an awareness of the body, because the body has a lot to tell us about where we're at, about our states of mind. So the most common application I teach in an MBSR setting, for example, is to be able to be aware of the body in a context or in an experience where you're stressed, right? So a lot of people, when they feel stress, they may not necessarily notice the body. They may not even be able to break down the experience to say, oh, when I'm suffering from stress, this happens, that happens. They just know I'm stressed, and it's sort of like this huge lump of mass, right? Or this huge dirt ball with all the dirty stuff in it, but you just know it's terrible, it's horrible, I don't want it. And when we don't pay attention to what stress is doing to us or how we are managing or processing this stress, we can very easily just, and it's almost by autopilot that we divert our attention away from this unpleasantness of the stress. And that's when a lot of the self-destructive behaviors come in. So case in point, I'm going to raise a personal example here. I used to be quite a drinker. I used to be quite an alcoholic when I was in my corporate work days. And essentially, alcohol was my coping mechanism. And obviously, I wasn't coping very well, right? Because I went through a phase of being quite addicted to alcohol, and I would just go through these cycles of facing stress, not being happy with that stress, and trying to seek something pleasant to counter that unpleasantness of the stress. And that's when I would seek out a glass of wine, or a beer or whatever. And the thing about seeking pleasant feelings is that once you start, you don't want to stop, because you know that when you stop, you have to go back to that something unpleasant again. So that's how my love for drinking sort of just got bigger and bigger, deeper, stronger. And it wasn't until I started meditating, especially with Vipassana, that I realized that my body was suffering a lot, and my body was screaming for help and telling me that I should address the stresses that I've been through. So it's very interesting, because once you start paying attention to the body, then there's so much to discover, so much to find out. And usually it just takes this awareness for you to realize how you might want to change your life. So back when I was really stressed and I was drinking alcohol, I think it doesn't help that alcohol was numbing my sensation, and I couldn't really feel the body, and it just goes into a vicious cycle. But once I started practicing mindfulness and meditation, I was suddenly very aware of the body, and I was very aware that whenever stress comes, certain parts of the body gets triggered. So my most common trigger point is, for example, I would have this this growing anxiety in the tummy area, right? Which it always comes with a stressful point, and that's when, because it feels so uncomfortable, I just want to get it out of the way. I don't want to face it, and then immediately I turn to alcohol. So that's my trigger that leads to the self-destructive behavior, the maladaptive coping behavior. And when I learn to turn my attention inward and learn to just observe this unpleasant sensation in the tummy, that's when I can manage myself better, right? I'm just sitting here, I'm just observing, and I know with a very clear mind that I don't have to turn to alcohol. I can just sit with this unpleasantness and be okay with it and not react to it. So, and this is one of the primary reasons why we want to turn our attention to the body, especially when it comes to stress management, because the body can tell us a lot. It senses triggers, right? So unpleasant feelings, unpleasant sensations, and pain are actually good for us in this sense, right? It gives us warning signals. So a lot of, say, students of MBSR, when they first start the program, they get very frustrated, or they get very confused and annoyed, because once they start turning their attention inward, they realize, oh, I have so many problems with my body, right? Once I start sitting even for 5 minutes, my legs go numb, I have trouble breathing, I'm feeling like restless, I just want to move about all the time. And all these are actually accumulated stress and the memories of the trauma that we have put our mind and body through, that's stored in the body that we don't know has been there. So I think over time, as we practice mindfulness, it helps us to be more at ease with the body and to know the body better, which paves the way for more effective stress management.
Thank you for sharing those insightful moments. And it just got me thinking about, there's quite a lot of things you've mentioned. And when mentioning about body as well, which can be a very sensitive but important topic to a lot of people, or to most people, self-image and our perception on the physical body. And if I can expand this conversation a little bit more, it's like yesterday evening, I was sharing with one of my cats. Sometimes I share with my cat certain things. So I was sharing with one of my cats about this physical vessel, the body, known as rupa in the Indian traditions. Realistically, when it's not animated, or even when it's animated by life force, it's still susceptible to illness, disease, and what I told my cats was, it will be eaten by maggots one day.
Yes.
It's not to paint a morbid picture, it's realistic. We have this perception, of sweeping it under the carpet, the realistic aspect that human flesh, made out of the tissues, made out of the, the tendons and blood, and, it's all susceptible to decay. So the moment we are born is already heading towards this decay. No matter how we study life in the various sciences, right? How we see it, like, oh, there's a peak performance, there's all this and all that, but it's all heading towards every moment has this, this kind of transitoriness and transformation qualities, which are all part of impermanence. So we have this over-grandiose or underwhelming kind of perception of body. Oh, I should look like this, I should look like that. I'm not I know this is not what we are actually mentioning in term. It's part of mindfulness, but just to expand it out, not really on the, you've mentioned about the sensation, but now it's more also about how we feel in terms of our mental state, in terms of happiness or unhappiness. So we have this over grandiose idea of how beauty should be, for example, when it comes to the body. So do you have any sharings about how to be more realistic or how to be more practical when we ruminate, as you mentioned earlier, on thought patterns like this, which do not really serve us beneficially, even though we think it's looking like this or not looking like this, this kind of attachment or aversion. How do we incorporate mindfulness when we catch ourselves in these kinds of patterns?
Mm. So thoughts are something that we work with quite diligently in practicing mindfulness, even in secular mindfulness. Could be mental states, but then we talk about specific thought patterns or emotions that come up because emotions are essentially cognitive as well. So it's not difficult for us to realize that we are ruminating, or there could be certain cognitive distortions that we have, whether it's about our self-image or something that happens to us. And we usually get into trouble when we don't see the impermanence, the impermanent nature of thoughts, and we tend to think every thought that comes in has to be true because it came into my mind, right? So while in a secular setting, I would say it may be difficult to um, to explain within certain secular contexts that thoughts are impermanent and we can just allow them to just come and go, just like how body sensations come and go. It can be difficult for people to grasp. But what we want to focus on and to highlight to people is a practice of discernment. So with mind, especially with secular mindfulness, when people look at it, they might think, and some people have come to me as well, and they say, "Oh, are you teaching people to be detached and to just live like a robot, right? You're just, oh, thoughts come and I'm not bothered and I don't really care about it. I even don't even know that I've thought I'm living like a zombie all day. I don't get to enjoy life and things like that." So they tend to have the perception that mindfulness is like that. But I always like to explain that mindfulness is actually a practice of discernment. There has to be discernment about what is helpful for us or not, right? So in Buddhist teachings, it could be what is, for example, a right view, a wrong view. But then, people might have trouble understanding right and wrong, so we use helpful or unhelpful. So it boils down to whether, so you have to decide for yourself, right? If you have a thought at this moment, if you have an unpleasant thought or a negative thought, obsessive thought, and you have to ask yourself, is it helpful for my attention to stay here? Is it helpful for me to sustain my attention here on this string of thoughts that's basically bringing me a lot of unhappiness? Or is it better if I were to shift my attention away? So this awareness comes first, and then this discernment comes next. And then the third one would be the skill. If you decide this is not where you want to be, then that's where the skill of mindfulness comes in. How do you want to shift your attention away from this thought process to somewhere else that could be more neutral and that does not might not translate into a maladaptive coping behavior, right? So, for example, I may have some obsessive rumination about what my boss said to me or what my partner said to me, something nasty maybe. It's bothering me. It's been bothering me for the longest time. And then I'm aware of it, okay, and I discern that it's not helpful for me. Now, the third step about the skills is very important because, and it marries with discernment as well, because what are you going to do next? How are you going to manage this relationship with this thought pattern next? So by default, we just want to avoid it, right? Because the thought is so unpleasant for us. So like I mentioned just now, we would just automatically divert our attention somewhere else. Maybe we pick up our phone and we start scrolling through social media in hope that we're essentially shifting our attention away from the thoughts to something else, something external, right? But not knowing that when we do that with external things, a lot of times we can become attached to that external object of attention as well, right? So in modern life, it would of course be the phone or food, right? When people are stressed, then they do certain stress eating. So we have to discern for ourselves whatever that we choose to divert our attention to, is that going to be helpful to us or not? And even if something that appears to be helpful, for a start, let's say going to the gym. I always use this example, right? People think, oh, working out, running on the treadmill, it's something healthy for me, right? It's good. I can just divert my attention there every time I have some unpleasant thoughts. But then I've also met people who attach themselves so much to going to the gym that if they missed out on one gym session, they just feel uncomfortable throughout. They feel like their life is falling apart. Like they have to go to the gym at the same time every day, right? So, and with mindfulness skills, we would teach people how to shift their attention away from what's not helpful to them to somewhere else. So we learn to anchor our attention to somewhere. So what is this somewhere? So it's generally an object of meditation. And we usually prescribe something internal. And the easiest for people to pick up is the breath, right? Because we carry the breath wherever we go, and we learn to shift our attention away to the breath. So essentially, that is the basics of how we would train the attentional flexibility. That's a skill by itself. But at the same time, as we progress deeper into the practice, we also want to teach people how to be able to observe their thoughts, right, without further engaging in them. So this is very helpful because even when we are placing our attention on the breath, thoughts are still going to come in, right? So for beginners, maybe you're not able to fully concentrate, zoom in on the breath. As you place your attention on the breath, within a few seconds, those obsessive thoughts are going to come in again, right? And then you're like, why are they there? Okay, I'm going to come back to my breath again. And then a few seconds later, they're going to be there. So another skill that we teach is to just simply observe, right? So this is the scope. This goes to the scope of our attention. As we're paying attention to the breath, we're also allowing these thoughts to be there without further engaging in them. Kind of like a scientist just sitting back and observing an experiment without touching it, without, not expecting certain results. So I like to say it's like the scientist attitude to that. So we want to be able to adopt this attitude and this skill of observation to our thoughts and to our emotions and to our mental states.
Awareness, discernment, skillfulness. So
Yes.
these are the three components Erin has just shared with us. The secrets to mindfulness as taught within the MBSR tradition. And another thing you've mentioned very importantly is the anchor to whenever our monkey mind swing from tree to tree, from attachment to aversion, from whatever is pleasant to unpleasant, whatever we are ruminating or striving towards in an obsessive way, or in a way which is, too aversive. So the anchor as in a concentration point, and in this techniques you are teaching us is towards the breath, which is anupanasati, the mindfulness of breathing. So it's also just noticing how, just to anchor on the quality of our breath, the length of our breath, how deep is our breathing. And actually, or essentially, it matters, but it doesn't really matter at all as we get into the practice. At least to my experience, it matters in a sense that it's really important for deep diaphragmatic breathing, and but what actually when I say it doesn't matter, as we progress through the layers of mindfulness of breathing, we then have to, in a sense, let go of the previous layers. So it matters in a sense of the anchoring, as Erin has mentioned, and then it gets to a point where if we want to deepen our meditative absorption or just to not be too attached to the practice, then we have to slowly let go, and then we are in that natural state. So it's very informative what you're sharing about the anchor point, and in different traditions, you have, for example, you have whether we've spoken about breathing, and then you have the tratak, which is in the yogic tradition, which is the candle meditation. It's either the tip of the flame or the tip of the candle, which not to whenever our mind is straying, we slowly realign, and then we slowly refocus, and then we enter. So there are many various ways with the breathing, with an object. It could be for example, in the Buddhist or Hindu and yogic traditions, it could be an object of the deity.
Yes.
It could be a mandala. So there are many dimensions of empowering experiences with some of these methods. But the main thing is we are speaking about here is to not allow our mind to be too reactive, not allowing ourselves to be too reactive towards this kind of habitual ways of thinking, almost like a samsaric mind, which is going in circles. And the thing you mentioned about awareness, discernment, and skillfulness, sometimes, many times, even for myself over the years, we barely even scratch this first surface of awareness. We are just unaware. It's subconsciously, unconsciously, consciously interplaying within this three realms, just to get to awareness. So that's why what you've mentioned with the anchor is so important. And then from there, the discernment, and then again the skillfulness of knowing what to do, when and how and why and in which form.
Yes.
So it's really interesting. So for a person is so busy, with the work, with family commitments, with financial management or mismanagements, there's so many or preoccupations of the world, so many stresses. How can the person who is so stressed and all that, what are some of the very, very basic things we can do to recenter, to realign, to refocus using MBSR and mindfulness?
So one of the so as we try to reach out to people and to introduce mindfulness to them, and they sort of find out, what it's all about and what's required of them, one of the most common responses that I get is, I have no time. I'm so busy, right? You're telling me to take an 8-week program? You're telling me to practice 10 minutes a day? I don't even have 10 minutes to rest, right? So there's a misconception that to begin with mindfulness takes a lot of time. And I would have to say that it takes commitment, but it doesn't take a lot of commitment to start. And there are many ways to practice mindfulness, and it really depends on how deep you want to go. Like when you mentioned about the absorption states, if you really want to go deep into meditation practice, then yes, you need to commit a lot of time, a lot of your own effort. You need to put in a lot of effort. But I think for most of us out there who want to use this as a skillful means to live a better way of life, then it really depends on how far you want to go. And if you just want to integrate some moments of it in your day-to-day life, then you can start with something as simple as informal practice. So I'm going to talk about informal and formal practice. So informal practice, it's helpful for people because it clears the misconception that you have to stop everything that you're doing in order to be aware. You don't have to, because essentially, if mindfulness is a way of being, it's a way of life, then whatever that you're engaged in, whatever that you're doing, you could practice mindfulness and you could be aware. So what I usually recommend is for people to work it into their day-to-day self-care routines. And my favorite is always brushing the teeth, because people tend to think brushing your teeth is, just a chore that I have to get to. And when they're brushing their teeth, they're also multitasking. They're looking at their phones. They're screaming at their kids. Their mind is like miles away thinking about work, etc. So, and brushing the teeth takes 3 minutes? And you can take this 3 minutes every morning and every night. Just open your senses to the whole experience of brushing your teeth, and suddenly you're aware. Not only are you aware of the activity of brushing your teeth, you're also aware of the body in response to the brushing actions. You're also aware of the mind, what comes into the mind in the whole process. So you're also noticing the nature of the mind. Something as simple as that. I just wanted to bring in a research study. I'm not very familiar with it, but I thought it was really interesting. They got a group of undergrad students to wash the dishes mindfully every day. And it found that I think over the course of, if I'm not wrong, 8 or 10 weeks, the stress levels dropped, right? So it can be something as simple as that. So 101 ways you could do informal practice. In terms of formal practice, I always like to tell people to think big, but start small. So why think big? Because you don't just sit for the sake of sitting, right? You need to be very clear what mindfulness is going to do for you, not to take it as a tool, but to know what it means to you and what you're trying to transform about your life. So think big could be I wanna uh, I want to experience more peace, or I want to be able to experience more calm in times of stress. So these are big intentions. So we start with big intentions, but when it comes to really practicing it, we start with small, pragmatic steps. My favorite is to just recommend to absolute beginners just 1 minute every day. Let's say when you wake up, or in the middle of the day, or before you sleep. And in this 60 seconds, you're going to notice so much about your state of mind and even your body. And a lot of people find that, hey, I can't even stay still for 60 seconds. It is so difficult to stay still for 60 seconds. A lot of people realize, oh, my mind is just so in chaos all the time. In just 60 seconds, they can know that. Some of us fall asleep immediately, right, within a few seconds. And this just shows how exhausted we are, and just shows how dull our awareness is. And we start with formal practice with just 1 minute, and then we can slowly build up the minutes from there, and to be really practical about what works for us. So we may see a lot of practitioners out there who are sitting for hours and hours, and you don't really have to start with that. So start with something that works for you, and then if you find that it is working for you, then you can increase the frequency or increase the duration from there.
Very useful that you've mentioned about formal and informal practice, because there's always this misunderstanding that meditation, concentration, mindfulness, so on and so forth, requires sitting on a cushion in lotus position, requiring stillness of body and mind. And it scares a lot of people. It scares a lot of people. It gives a lot of people also low self-confidence, in a sense that I can't do this. So many things to look at here, and you've covered quite a lot already in 40 minutes, which is really interesting if you're just tuning in. We've covered about we're speaking about mindfulness-based stress reduction and related topics here with Erin from Mindful Moments. We've covered the awareness, the discernment, and the skillful means, the anchor point, mindfulness of breathing, and now we're speaking about coping with the stresses in daily life with formal and informal practice. So when I started out with meditation, mindfulness, I think I didn't know the different terminologies and all back in my late teens, early 20s. And I never had a teacher. I wasn't in any kind of tradition. I wasn't in any teacher. I was just depending my sources on books and on articles and YouTube videos, or those kind of meditational guides. And I think it took me several years to actually siphon through and to actually get a kind of a practice which was more stable, because there's so many different kinds of information there, and if we are not trained in a particular way, we'll get very confused and lost. So meditation is this, or meditation is that, and we don't realize that there are many forms of meditation, and as you mentioned, formal and informal practice. So I think what's very important is we have to start somewhere, and as you mentioned, this starting with 1 minute. I think earlier on in my life, I always thought, okay, I need to sit down for an hour. And then slowly I became more realistic. It wasn't, I couldn't sit as long, and the mind, most of the time it's like you might be thinking, oh, how long more do I have to go, or do I really need to do this? So it's good to start small, as you've mentioned. There are many apps these days, or we can even use an alarm clock on our phone. I wouldn't really recommend that as the best way because it can seem a bit unnatural, but it's a start. I think it's good to experiment and see what works for us. And then I think over times, these are very more of the very superficial aspects, but over time we will get more unique, more, we will slowly move, hopefully, past these stages into just being more relaxed, in a more relaxed state, not thinking too much about when your alarm is going to ring on your phone or whether the app is stopped playing or not. So I
Right.
think it's really important to start where you are, as Pema Chodron has mentioned, so start where you are. And we're all at different capacities and capabilities, and it's no point to care too much about what others are doing. And one of my teachers always mentioned about this analogy, which I like to share. And I think it's very common. I think, for many of us who are tuning in. So we come to, whether it's a meditation center or we are sitting down for teachings, or it can be a lecture, it can be any form. And we have been there for many years. We're still finding it so difficult. And then a newcomer comes in, perfectly still, perfectly attentive, you know, and seems to, there's this bright freshness. And then we like, how does that person manage to do that? And I've been here 10 years, 15 years, the same neurotic patterns and all these things. And that was, so we've our anchor, as you mentioned, the anchor has already shifted externally. And it causes the anxiety to come up. It causes the kind of jealousy to come up, this kind of comparison. And we already lose the sense of the practice. So, and this happens a lot. Maybe we can hear from you more. When we go into that state of self-criticism or a very judgmental point of mind, which is not surfaceable at all, and this is different from discernment. And when we are comparing ourselves with others and we externalize our attention, how do we bring it back? How do we stop this rumination to, you know, to bring back to our practice?
So self-judgment is just so common, so common with Westernized culture. I think even in Asia and especially in a place like Singapore, I'm seeing a lot of that. So, for example, I would have people coming, sitting in MBSR, and it's in many weeks, right? But then they still find that their mind is wandering off like a monkey, and they can't tame it, and they get so frustrated. They've been sitting every day for half an hour, but then their legs still go numb, and they get frustrated, like why isn't anything changing, and it's not all me, and mindfulness is not for me. And when I hear about that, when they share this with me, then I would tell them to take this as a moment of practice, right? So if you think about it, the focus, or what's most important about the practice is not how calm you are when you're sitting, or whether it's a painless sit, or whether it's a fully concentrated sit. But it's really learning to work with the thoughts that come in, right? So yes, so the original intention, let's say in a 15-minute awareness of breath, was to sustain your attention at the breath. But if you have thoughts of judgment coming in, and this is a moment of practice, you notice a thought of self-criticism coming in, and you notice this is a thought, and this thought is not helpful for me. So this by itself, awareness and recognition of this thought as unhelpful, is already a practice by itself. So I would tell them, you're already practicing by noticing that you have these unpleasant thoughts of criticism about yourself. So this is the mindfulness part. And with mindfulness practice, I think it can't just be about the skill alone. If we only look at it as a skill, then it can be very limiting for how effective it can be for us. I think it needs to be supplemented with certain qualities or certain attitudes. So in the MBSR context, we have what we call the foundational attitudes of mindfulness. And one of it that I'm going to mention a few. So the first one that I always recommend for people to practice and to try to invoke and bring in is the attitude of kindness. right? And kindness is relatively foreign to all of us. Why? Because when we talk about kindness, we think about extending kindness to help other people, but we never think about extending kindness to ourselves. So in my guidance, I'm always trying to inspire people to bring in more kindness to the moments of their practice, right? So this being a very gentle practice for you, you're not trying to force anything. Like you said, start where you are or meet yourself where you are currently and not working beyond your limits. So kindness is something that's very important to practice, and we in a secular setting we would practice a little bit of loving kindness as well, and we tell people it's about learning to send kind, gentle, positive thoughts and wishes, not just to other people, but learning to do so with ourselves. The next one is compassion. Compassion is something that's really deep, and I think Josh, you would be able to talk a little bit more about this as well. But you know, with compassion, it's not easy already to show compassion to others, especially when they are your instigators or the perpetrators. But it's even more difficult to show compassion to ourselves when we meet with our own sufferings. Let's say we're sitting here, we're trying to be calm, and we have all these unpleasant thoughts about ourselves, about how we're the worst human being in the whole world, and all the the low self-esteem emotions coming up. So it's all the more difficult, but it's because that we're able to feel these sufferings and these difficulties, are we able to practice compassion on ourselves. So kindness, compassion are two attitude qualities that we want to bring in. The third one that I find really helpful is the attitude of curiosity. And curiosity is a direct antidote to judgment, right? Because with curiosity, you are not placing any evaluations on anything. And when we judge ourselves, we're thinking ourselves as good, this is bad, I'm doing this right, I'm doing this wrong. So we think in these black and white terms, but curiosity is free of that. And it's just basically just seeing what's here without placing a value, a judgment on that. So bringing in curiosity to every moment of our practice is very important. So when a thought comes in, oh, okay, a thought comes in, right? Even knowing that, oh, this thought feels unpleasant. Oh, this thought is familiar. I've had this thought for the longest time. Oh, when this thought comes in, I feel this tightness in my chest. That's interesting, right? So by invoking this curiosity, you're already directly sort of combating the judgments that you automatically place on yourself. So that helps to break the loop of judgment a little.
Very beautiful. You've mentioned aspects of the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, and you've mentioned curiosity, but I can tie that up with equanimity. And with these practices and with this incorporation and integration, there's joy, or we can add joy to it. So we have a few minutes left before we wrap up today's session, this year's session. So what better way than to have Erin to lead us and guide us in a few minutes of mindfulness practice. Erin, up to you.
Sure. So we're just going to practice noticing what's here for us without the need to engage in anything. And then we're going to turn our attention inward and just noticing the body and the breath. Okay. So you can just be where you are. It's best if you're sitting down, but you want to ensure that our posture is comfortable but wakeful, right? So you may want to just sit away from the back of what you're leaning on and just ensure that the spine is straight, relaxing the shoulders. You can fold your hands in front of you on the lap, or just placing them on the knees. You can choose to close your eyes completely or just lower the gaze to the table or the floor. And let us begin by opening our awareness to what is here for us. So what is present for you in this experience? We're not trying to look for anything in particular. We're not trying to create or make up anything. Just whatever that may be here. And just noticing them. So perhaps you're noticing the presence of sound. Maybe there's light around you, filtering through the eyelids, the eyes. Maybe noticing movement around you. At this moment, maybe thoughts are arising, changing in the mind. Maybe emotions are present too. So just allowing all these to simply be a part of your experience without the need to change anything, without the need to push anything away. And then when you're ready, let's bring our awareness to this body in this space. So you might become aware of the air around the body in contact with the skin. The touch of the clothing against the body. Getting a sense of the overall shape, size, posture of the body. Noticing the contact that the body is making with the chair or the floor. Perhaps there are areas in the body that are calling for your attention. Maybe there's soreness or pain, tightness. Maybe you're noticing sensations of temperature. There's coolness or heat. Perhaps you're getting a sense of weight, of lightness or heaviness. Whatever that is here in the body, letting go of any need to change anything. And just allowing these sensations in the body to be a part of your experience. Now, when you're ready, I'd like to invite you to bring your attention now to the breath in the body. Simply notice the body sitting here and breathing in and breathing out. And just noticing where you best sense or feel the breath in the body. Maybe at the nose, noticing the temperatures of the breath. Perhaps paying attention to the movements of the breath at the shoulders, the chest, the belly. And just letting go of any need to deepen or lengthen the breath in any way. Allowing the breath to be natural. And just observing the breath for the way it is. And each time the mind wanders off to somewhere else, knowing that it's perfectly normal and all you need to do is to bring your attention back to the breath again. One breath at a time. Inviting gentleness, kindness, maybe even curiosity to every moment of this experience. And as this practice comes to an end, I'd like to invite you to take a deep breath in, releasing the breath all the way out, and just allowing the eyes to gently open or widen. So you can take a few moments to transition out of your posture. And thank you for practicing with me.
Thank you so much, Erin. I think this is a wonderful session to close this chapter of the video series that I've been doing. And, we've been friends for a short period of time, but very profound. So for those people who are tuning in, this is Erin Lee of Mindful Moments, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And I will include links for her website. She has more YouTube videos on the practices, and she's also a singer. There's some singing videos as well. Very beautiful voice. So, and click subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'll be back in early 2021. There'll be a few people who will be coming on the show, which has been agreed. So, yeah, we have this very sacred time. I mean, every moment is sacred, and every moment is so precious. And in this couple of weeks, we have so many events. We are on the solstice, winter solstice, and we also have the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. So for those people who are into astronomy and astrology, we have great conjunction happening tonight. And we also have, if we are following the Gregorian calendar, we have Christmas coming, on the 25th, followed by the full moon on the 30th. And then on 31st, we have New Year's Eve leading to New Year's Day. So very eventful week. I would say the next 10 to 14 days, a lot of significant events. So, yeah, Erin, before we go, what are your plans for Christmas, New Year, and do you have any aspirations for your projects for next year?
Well, so I'm hoping to take a pause near the end of the year and to just spend more time with myself, essentially, not just to rest, but to have time for more reflection and contemplation. Um, and for next year, I have the same intentions. I want to plant more seeds of mindfulness so that more people can start practicing and changing their lives. I hope to reach out to more people in meaningful ways. So if any of you have any good ideas that you like to suggest, please feel free to reach out to me.
Wonderful. And with that, I wish all the viewers and to you, Erin, I mean, once again, thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for your kindness and your generosity for doing this. Um, so you've mentioned about planting the seeds of mindfulness, and all of us here, whether we do not have a practice or whether we have some basic form of practice, we can continue to, or we can begin to cultivate the seeds of mindfulness, just like Erin, for ourselves in our own personal journey, and spread this joy and kindness and generosity to all sentient beings, to everyone around us, to share some of these methodologies of coping with stress and the anxieties of this life. So, Erin, once again, thank you so much for joining us. And for all the viewers, I will see you again in early 2021. Any last words?
Thank you. Thank you, Joshua, for having me. This has been very enjoyable. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. See you.